Hello and welcome back to our How to Paint series. Last time I was doing this Redemptor Dreadnought, I believe I got the name right that time, and I kind of said that I was going to do a little bit of cleanup and get a solid base covering off camera, but then I thought about it and that wouldn't be great content for beginners, right? I kind of want to walk through the whole process step by step with you, and if you already know what you're doing and you just want to see the next few steps, you can probably skip kind of towards the end of this video or just the next one altogether. I'm not sure how long this will really take, but we're going to go ahead and get right in with our Caliban green, same as before, and we're just going to be making sure that we have a good kind of second and third base layer. I am going to be using a much smaller brush this time just to kind of get rid of some of the brush marks that we got with the larger one. Unfortunately, I still do not have All Reliable. That was lost in the move somewhere, and I have yet to find it. Again, I have a very large collection of brushes sitting in a box, and while I could dig through them all, they all look very similar. So I'm not sure which one was quite the one we're using. But someday we'll find it, I promise. It will make a comeback. I will do my very best to give it its own special little video, kind of as a welcome back, right? And we did this last time. We're essentially doing the exact same thing. We're just getting a nice thin layer, covering up kind of everything that we've already done. Just making sure that we have very solid coverage. Even on a second layer, it can still look pretty blotchy, but that's okay. That just means your paint is thin, and that's a good thing. Again, if you have if you're getting really good coverage just with one layer, that's, it's fine. You can be passable with it if you're just doing that one layer. But the problem with painting like that is that you often have to go over mistakes that you make. And say that you're doing armor trim, right? You'll have this a lot with ultramarines, or if you're doing the smaller kind of decals. Let's say we paint the eagle here gold, and we've done a really solid layer around everything else. It's all one really smooth shade of green, no problems there. If we manage to mess up and we get that gold spilled onto the rest of our little model, going back over it again with another really solid layer is going to make our paint look really thick, and that's not what we want. We want to give ourselves the opportunity to make mistakes as well as to fix them with little to no problem. And I'm not sure if you're able to hear that. My dogs are going wild outside. I unfortunately have my bedroom window open, but we'll do our best to kind of ignore it. It's kind of funny. So where I work, we have two shifts. We do 6 to 6, and I do the night shift, and then we have a whole different set of guys that do the day shift. And just the other day, I was sitting down with one of our day shift guys. He managed to pick up a night shift for some overtime. And he's asking me about where I worked before and the hobbies I was into. And mind you, I have no idea who this guy really was. I just met him. And so I was like, oh, well, I do some gaming, just some kind of nerdy stuff. I do this thing called Warhammer, and it's kind of a rabbit hole. I really won't explain it to you, but I'll show you some of the models. So I go to pull up some of the stuff that I've been painting, and this man, I kid you not, he rolls up his sleeve, and on his forearm is a massive Inquisition tattoo. I was actually just shocked. Like, no one that I work with is into Warhammer except for like maybe two guys, and they are very novice in it. One of them just started reading the Horus Heresy at my recommendation, and he's really into it. But like, none of them paint or do any of the modeling or playing the tabletop or anything. And this guy's just like, yeah, no, I've been into this hobby since like second edition, which that's it's from like the 90s. I'm like, man, you kind of got me beat. Like, I'm nerdy, but I've only been into this for like a year. So he started showing me some of his models. He does paint as well, and he has pretty much an army of like everything. He did lambast me pretty heavily. I've done some pretty great heresies with painting Space Marines. I've painted a lot of different chapters as Ultramarines. At some point, I will showcase my work, my awful work. I have a squad. I believe it's from the Space Wolves Combat Patrol. They have, specific wolf emblems on their shoulder pads, and I just painted them as Ultramarines. Just totally threw it out the window. But I have my own little lore for it. The whole reason why they're like that and why they're in my army. Maybe they're honorary Space Marines. Maybe they got separated from their chapter, and maybe they're the last survivors of like a big battle, right? And it just so happens that they were saved by Ultramarines, and they decided that they would join them. It was like a honorary Wolf Guard, right? And it's stories like that kind of give your army a very unique kind of personal feeling. Two armies might look the same paint wise, but the stories behind them is always the unique aspect. And that's kind of a fun little thing that I enjoy about this hobby. There's quite a few fun little things. I'm sure I've said that line many times now, but really it's just the hobby that keeps on giving. There's always kind of a new aspect to enjoy in it. And that is perfect for me. That's exactly what I want, There's always a new book to be read. I'm currently on the Caiaphas Cain series. I'm like 20% through the omnibus right now. The first one, at least. And I'm really enjoying it. I think Caiaphas thinks very lowly of himself, but he's actually like, despite the meme, he is quite literally a hero of the Imperium. But overall, there's just tons of stuff. Even if you're not into Space Marines, there's always Imperial Guard. There's AdMech. There's Chaos Space Marines if you want to go that route. There's just always something new to find that you can enjoy, and I feel like that's why this hobby is so great. Everyone can find their kind of niche. And as we get into the kind of harder to reach aspects here, you'll have to forgive my poor camera work. My brush is actually caught. Again, if you're using very cheap brushes like I am, it's much easier to kind of just stick your brush and bristles into areas that normally you wouldn't with an expensive one. Because you don't have to worry about ruining this brush. It's like $2. No big deal at all. And we'll kind of give our guy a little once over here as we set him down, and I can get some more paint on my palette. If you've seen the other parts, you'll know that I'm absolutely horrible with never applying enough paint at any given time. I'm always having to refill my palette. So I'm going to go ahead and give a big glob there. And right back to it. Again, I don't really want to worry too much about kind of what's underneath this little front plate, but I will move my lamp a little bit so I'm not hitting it constantly. I will make sure we have kind of a solid layer, at least on the bottom aspect here, just to make sure that it is at least painted. If someone for some reason lifts up that piece, they won't see that it's just gray. It's rather embarrassing, and I would hate to have that happen. But if you're okay with that, and you don't think anyone's going to be messing with your models, or even if you just want to glue it shut, you really don't have to worry about this area at all. Again, I mentioned this in the first part. This thing kind of sucked to paint. This front panel here on the bottom is meant to open up. I don't know whether it's just specific to the one that I got or the way that I assembled it. I promise I can read. I followed the instructions as closely as I could, but it just would not go on the way that it was meant to. And so I kind of had to do a little bit of finagling with the glue, and now it doesn't open. It actually doesn't move at all, which is fine. I don't mind, but on a technical level, it is meant to be a moving piece. But we won't worry too much about that. And you can kind of see hopefully at least, you kind of get the sense that our model is coming together here. We're getting much more solid coverage on areas that are looking kind of rough before. And by the time it's done, it still probably won't be perfect. There'll still be kind of a little bit of splotchy in the harder to reach areas. But I will do my very best to kind of get as much as we can here. And once again, I'm running out of paint. I always underestimate just how much I go through. Like, I'll put a big glop down and it's just nearly enough for like the arm, you know. It's just such a huge model. So we will get some more water on our brush, just to keep our paint thin. And we'll go back in to get some more. And another thing that I like to mention every now and then, just in case you're joining us on this part for some reason and you missed the other ones, it's not only about how much water is mixed in with your paint, it's also a good thing to be careful of how much paint is on your brush. It's very easy to kind of overload it, and it'll give you the same effect as if you didn't water it down at all. It'll look very rough and kind of textured when it's dry. And, you know, sometimes you can use that as an effect. You know, maybe you know, you're looking for like a very dusty kind of look, and you can do that to a pretty decent effect using that specific technique. Or you can just dry brush. Dry brushing does that very easily as well. So there's always a time and a place to use every kind of tool in your arsenal. But for the most part, we do want to avoid it. And I found a very hard to reach spot is kind of back underneath these exhaust plates. I don't even know if you'll be able to see it. Let me try to move my lamp around a little bit here. No, you can't see it. There's shadows there. But there is a little bit of gray back there, and it's kind of hard to reach, so just make sure that you can get that if you're able. And actually, the whole underside of the torso is looking a little rough, but it's in the shadows. So, you know, do your best to kind of get a solid layer on it, but don't worry too much about it. It's very difficult to see, especially if I didn't have, you know, 2 desk lamps pointing down at it. So I'm sure, you know, just having this on a shelf as a kind of display piece, no one would be able to tell anyway. And again, not enough paint on the brush. That's okay, or on the palette rather. The amount of paint we have on the brush is perfect. We were getting some really nice coverage. I'm really enjoying this so far. Haven't done any horrible mistakes yet. I did. I think I pointed this out last time. The kind of mounted gun here on the top was pointed the wrong way around. I did manage to fix it. Unfortunately, when I was gluing it, though, it like took off a big chunk of my paint. You can probably see it, maybe. It's kind of painted over now, so it's a little bit harder. But like right here in the front of it is a little bit lighter because it took off a bunch of my paint. And I use I think it's Tayama is how you pronounce it, the extra thin glue. It's very good for plastic models. It's I believe technically an acetone, so it melts plastic very quickly, and that's kind of how it helps join it together. But it also is very good at removing paint, so be careful with applying it to a already painted model. And it'll strip off your primer too if you're not careful. It'll just chew right through everything. That's kind of why I don't like sub-assemblies. I see a lot of people do it. If I was doing like commission work, I probably would. But I've tried it before, and you know, when I go to paint it all together, or when glue it all together, the Tayama kind of can get rid of a lot of your paint and ruin your paint job very quickly. You know, after you're all finished and everything's said and done. So I just kind of avoid that altogether by just, you know, painting it as one piece. It does unfortunately lead to more awkward angles we have to reach here. And again, it's in the shadows, so you can't really see it. But underneath this front armor panel, there is a little bit of gray. There is some primer on it though, so a quick layer will just adhere to it with no problem. And we will get as much here as we can. It's one thing to have an area that's just straight gray. It's another thing to have an area with primer, and it's the least offensive of all to have an area that's just the exposed black. I feel like you can get away with that a lot easier. You can kind of, excuse it as being a shadow. But you do kind of want to get the best coverage you can, for obvious reasons, of course. And just going over very quickly, there is some areas I need to touch up just a little bit, but we're almost done here. We are at kind of the point where it's finished enough that I would be comfortable just doing cleanup off camera. So we are going to move on, and we'll do a little bit of the plasma gun today. A lot of it is meant to be black, and I've kind of gotten some green all over it. So we will clean that up. And I'm not sure how I want to do these. This like joint in the front, I think we're going to keep it green, but it could also be silver if we really wanted to. That's alright, we won't get too pedantic about it. It's mostly covered by bigger pieces anyway, so I'm not too concerned. We also want to make sure we get these kind of front missile launchers. And we'll be going back over them probably with either red or black, depending, just on the tips of the missiles. But overall, we won't worry about that right now. And another useful tip, I've kind of been ignoring my own advice on it this whole time, but if your brush is going in the same direction, I kind of keep this panel by panel just because it can get kind of awkward to do your entire model in one direction with your brush strokes. But you kind of want to move in the same way. You can see here I'm going from left to right. And the more you do that, the better it helps to hide your brush strokes in the end. And it also helps with going back over the areas you've already painted while they're still drying. It helps you avoid that. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind. It'll just make your overall product look a lot cleaner. And I'm sure there's like a technical, artistic way to explain that better, but I'm not too inclined in that sort of aspect. So I'll just throw it out there the best way I can. Keep brush going in same direction. Make it simple for the simple man. And we'll go over it one last time. I can still do a little bit of work on the underside, but that's okay. I do want to move on to our next part, and that is going to be our plasma gun. So we're going away from the Caliban green here, and get our brush nice and clean. We don't want any green residue on while we're trying to paint a new spot. Although the black will probably cancel it out, so don't worry too much about it. And we're moving on to Old Reliable here, Abaddon Black. I absolutely love Abaddon Black. I use it on every model, either as a shade or just as a base layer. It's just infinitely useful. Always make sure to have one or two paint pots of it on hand. A bit like non-oil. You can never have enough non-oil. And of course, you're not a true Warhammer painter until you spill your first can of non-oil. But that's alright. I haven't spilled non-oil yet, but I have knocked over a thing of Agrax Earthshade, and that was a little bit more devastating to me. I really love Agrax. I probably use it more than I do non-oil now, and I did have to buy a whole new pot, so it was quite the upset for me. And we'll go back in. Again, we want to be careful not to get those coils. We are going to go over them with a much lighter color once it's all said and done. But we will do our very best. And here's a pro tip here, because that area is kind of so narrow. use the back of your brush. It is a raised area, so your brush will just kind of naturally stick to it and stay away from the coils because they're lower, obviously. And we'll move on to the underside. And the front we want to be silver, except for the bottom here. I did get a little bit carried away. We'll have to go back over that with some silver at some point, but I won't worry about it too much right now. And we're at another weird angle, so bear with me. We'll just do our best to get back here. And I really missed this area the first time around, so it's a good thing we're coming back and getting to it now. But as good as you can, just turn it around, get into those kind of more shaded areas, and get a full amount of coverage. And black is nice. It really depends on how thin you make it. It does a really good job of just doing one solid layer with very thin layers. Kind of the darker your paint, the easier it does it. So don't be afraid if you're getting one good layer and you think it's too thick. It's probably not. It's just how black works, at least in my experience. And I think, is there anything else we want to do black? Maybe the gun on top, right? And I'm not worried about touching our bottle now because it is mostly dry. We're just going to do a quick little once over here on top. If I can kind of finagle this around so you can still see it. Just kind of be careful not to get it on the rest of your Dreadnought. I already kind of did, but that's okay. It's not enough to be the end of the world. And I might need a smaller brush to do this, but you can kind of get in here. There we go. Into those little recessed areas. The bigger your brush, the more difficult it is to get into the recesses. I try to usually use the biggest brush I can, but that depends on the project we're working on. Obviously the one we used last time was much larger than this little brush, but now that we're working on kind of getting a more clean effect, and especially with the panels, we don't want big brush streaks visible, so you want to move to a smaller, more manageable brush if you can. If you only have one, more power to you. Most of my models I painted with a single, I think it was a number 2 brush, which is much smaller. This is a number 6. It's kind of mangled, so you can't really tell how big it is, but a lot of models took quite a while. My original Dreadnought, which I'll showcase it here just because I want to make sure everyone knows what our finished product is going to be like. This guy was painted with a number 2 size brush, and it took forever. Also, don't worry about the base. We're going to do a whole thing on basing. I really don't like how this turned out. I kind of wanted like a splattered blood effect, but I've got some stuff in the works. We are going to do a whole episode just on basing alone. And I think overall, that's kind of a good spot to wrap it up at. When we come back, again, we're just going to be doing a little bit of cleanup. We're going to be going back over some of these areas with silver. We'll be finishing with our Caliban green base layer, which is mostly done, honestly. And I promise, next episode will be the one we will do these coils. We will at least get started on them. It does take like 3 or 4 layers of different paints, so it might take us 2 parts, but I promise we will start on it. And I think just do one last once over. I always miss something, I promise. That's good enough. We'll leave it there, and next time we'll come back and we'll make sure everything's looking pristine and perfect. As always, if you guys enjoyed this, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. It helps me out a ton, and it kind of lets me, engage with you guys a little bit and get feedback, which I love. I have a Patreon, link is in the description. It just helps me get more videos out more often, so if you like what I do and you want to support it, feel free to check that out. Otherwise, thank you guys very much, and hopefully I'll see you in the next part.